In 2026, Germany has 5 very important state elections, and in this video I want to give an overview of what we can expect from the results based on current polling. Now, some are going to be held in September and some are going to be held in March, so we're anywhere from 5 to 11 months away from those elections, but I do think it's important to kind of give a general early outlook of what we can expect next year. Now, the first thing I want to actually take a look at is something that someone in the comments asked me to cover in my last video, and this was a number of referendums that occurred in Hamburg. I believe these were voted on last Sunday, around a week ago. And the first one was a universal basic income, the Grundeinkommen Volksabstimmung, and the second one was more related to climate change. And the referendums, of course, in Germany are something that occur, maybe not as common as other countries. You know, the one that's the most notable, probably most people think of is the Brexit referendum, which occurred in Britain. That was something that was hugely important in European politics for almost a decade. Before and after, and in Germany, you haven't had too many major referendums like that have kind of garnered national attention. But there are, of course, instances like this where you do have attempts at pushing one certain political issue directly to the people. And the reason this is so significant is because with a referendum like this, you don't have the political parties directly involved. Of course, the political parties themselves are going to have a position in favor or against, but this is a way that an interest group or an organization or activist can push an issue directly to the voters without having to worry about the bureaucracy of the parties or building a majority. Now, I want to take a look at the results. The first one was for the Grundeinkommen, for the universal basic income referendum. Ended up failing. It did not win enough of the vote or it did not, most people voted against it. Now, the way the referendums work is that you need to, of course, it needs to be approved by a majority of the people, but it also has to clear 20%. The yes vote has to clear 20% of the registered voters, which means that, of course, for it to pass, you have to win, more people have to vote in favor of it than against it. But even the people that vote in favor of it, they have to reach 20% of the registered voters. And so even if the yes vote wins and you have a situation where there's super low turnout, it can be this instance where you win more votes than the other side, but the referendum is invalid based on turnout. Now, we saw here 56% of the population of Hamburg abstained from this election. This is not too abnormal in local elections or anything like this. You're not going to have as high turnout as, say, a federal election that's running for months with all kinds of debates and advertisements and money and campaigning involved. And so this is not, too abnormal to see, over half the population abstain. Now, if we take a look at the results of the people who did vote, 62% of the people voted against it. So this is clear that the majority of people in Hamburg voted against accepting a form of universal basic income. But there is a difference in different parts of the city. In Hamburg Middle, Hamburg Mitte, where you have a lot of the more left-wing and green voters, they almost won here with 49% of those voting in favor of it. Hamburg Altona, which is somewhat also of a left-wing stronghold within Hamburg, we saw 43% voted in favor. And some of the other districts, which are more on the outskirts, maybe have more of a CDU voting or CDU or SPD voters who are more middle class and maybe against something like this. Of course, voted much more against it, even up into the 70s. And there's clear, difference. Younger people, students, some of the more left-wing people supported this initiative, whereas older, middle class, definitely CDU voters, many SPD voters were against this. But it was interesting. This is kind of the first of its kind, a kind of a test. And even if a referendum like this doesn't succeed, it does show that the possibility of doing something like this again or doing something like this on different issues. So it was definitely an interesting situation in the country. The other one was regarding climate change, and it was basically a declaration that the city of Hamburg will be completely climate neutral by the year 2040. Now, another thing with these referendums, it's super hard to kind of implement them because they're not always in exact. We saw this with Brexit. They're not always an exact law. They're kind of in a way to get approval for an initiative directly from the people, but how that's implemented by the city or state government is a complete different thing. Now, we take a look at the results for the climate change referendum. We saw 53% voted in favor to basically promise to make the city of Hamburg climate neutral by 2040. And if we take a look at this bar here, we can see 303,000 voted in favor, 267,000 voted against. But this little jagged white line is the 20% marker. And so here's what I was talking about. Even if the yes vote was higher than the no vote, if it had fallen below 20% of registered voters, then this referendum would have also have failed. So that's going to be it for those, and I want to get quickly into the different state elections. Now, like I said, these are very important state elections that are going to be happening in very big states, also smaller states that are going to be very dynamic in the way they play into politics, especially regarding the AfD in the East. And the first one to talk about is the elections in Baden-Württemberg. This is one that will occur in March of next year, and this is a very important state. It's the third largest state in Germany, the capital of Stuttgart. It's a former CDU stronghold that's been governed by the Greens for 15 years. Now, in 2011, we had the Fukushima Daiichi disaster with the nuclear power plant in Japan, and that created a lot of focus on the issue of nuclear energy. And that disaster pushed the Greens to the forefront in 2011. And in 2011, they won a huge victory in this state, and Winfried Kretschmann, their lead candidate, became the governor, and then he was elected again in 2016 and elected for a third time in 2021. He is stepping down, and the Greens have also lost a lot of the popularity. They've run the state for 15 years. They do a lot better here than other places, even especially on the state level. But with Kretschmann leaving and the Greens suffering a loss of their popularity, it is clear that this is going to be a defeat for them. They are still trying to hang on with Cem Özdemir, the former agriculture minister, running as their lead candidate, but it's going to be very difficult for the Greens to hold on for a fourth term without their incumbent candidate. We see that the AfD has grown here significantly. The Southwest is a place where the AfD does very well. Of course, the East is their biggest stronghold, but in the southwestern states, particularly this is one of their best states in Western Germany. But also, like I said, it is a former CDU stronghold. And even though in the last two elections the Greens came in first place, the CDU was behind them in second. And so this is kind of a reset of Baden-Württemberg back to the pre-2011 politics. But it's very different. We have the Greens are still very strong here, more than in other states. The AfD has doubled the result at around 20%. And we are still a bit away from this election. But it is likely, I think, from polls that we can expect the CDU to retake this state after 15 years and it to be governed by a CDU, probably CDU Green coalition, which is the invert of what it is now, which is a Green CDU coalition. And so if I would say, I would say this would be a victory for the AfD based off, doubling their support, a big defeat and loss for the Greens. But in general, I think that the CDU will, easily win this election and put forward the governor. The second state we're going to look at is the state of Rhineland-Palatinate, Rhineland-Pfalz, which is another southwestern state. And here we have a similar situation. This is somewhat of a more swing state between the CDU and the SPD, both on the federal level and on the state level. It's gone back and forth between the two parties. It has been run by the SPD a lot, though, in recent times. On the state level, Maler Dreyer, the minister president or governor, has run the state for 2 terms and is also stepping down. And so we're going to have a race between the CDU, SPD, and the AfD. The AfD also does very well here, but is almost guaranteed to not be able to govern the state, even if they come first place because of the lack of coalition partners. And so this will actually be a kind of excited, heated election between the CDU and the SPD, an election where we don't really know who's going to be the winner. And then the AfD will be there in a strong, maybe third. I mean, according to these polls, really any of these parties could come in any of these places. I could see the AfD come first place, SPD come first place, CDU come first place. So I think this one's a definite toss-up for who wins. But I think in the end, the CDU or the SPD will be able to win this election, put forward the governor, and it will be someone else new as well. The Greens do not do as well here in this state. They haven't built up on the state level, and they're down at around 10%. The third state, and this is the past 2, are going to be held in March, and these next 3, including this one, are held in September of next year. So this one's around a year, 11 months out. So a little bit more time for things to change. But we actually had a poll that came out for Saxony-Anhalt a few days ago, and it was somewhat of a shocker because it was the first poll where the AfD got 40% in. Their highest, I believe, was in the same state with 39%. And so this clearly shows that the AfD is continuing to rise in East Germany. They started rising in 2022. They fell some before the European elections. They came back at the federal elections, but now the AfD is even stronger than ever before at 40%. They're actually getting close to winning an absolute majority. The incumbent governor here, Rainer Haselhoff from the CDU, is also stepping down. So we have 3 incumbent governors in these state elections, all stepping down, people that have served 2 to 3 terms. And the CDU is going to likely be able to hold on to power unless the AfD wins an absolute majority, because once again, all the parties have ruled out working with the AfD. But this is going to be arguably one of the most important elections, because if the AfD can get themselves in a position to leverage their power to break the CDU or to break the so-called Brandmauer and force cooperation, that will change German politics immensely. And this will still be a kind of a symbolic victory for the AfD leading until the next federal elections, whenever we get them. And the CDU actually had a conference recently about how they're going to deal with the AFD, because this election, this situation is very difficult for the CDU. That, even if they are able to hold on to the governorship, they're going to have to work with parties like Die Linke and the BSV to prevent the AFD from getting into power. We also have another eastern state, the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, and here it is a similar situation in regards to the AFD. They are clearly ahead of all the other parties, but it is the incumbent governor, Manuel Schleswig, is from the SPD. And so the SPD here is stronger than the CDU, but we see that all three parties, the SPD, the CDU, and Die Linke, are, they're all double digits, but they're all very far behind the AFD. And so this will be another state where it's going to have a very difficult time forming a coalition unless the AFD wins an absolute majority or somehow breaks through and has a party such as the BSV or the CDU work with them. The last state election, or the Abgeordnetenhauswahl, Senate election, as it's sometimes called, is in the city of Berlin, which is also, like I said, its own state. Now, Berlin had a recount of its election in 2023. The last election was in 2021. They had a rerun of it in 2023, but the rerun did not reset the election date, so they're still going to have it next year. And Berlin is very interesting because it is a very left-wing city, even by German standards. You have pockets that are very supportive of Die Linke, the Greens, some of the urban, more traditional areas for the SPD, but also in recent times, the right-wing parties, the CDU and the AFD, have grown there significantly. The CDU has won the last election, and the mayor, or the governor or mayor, if you will, is from the CDU and in the current government with the SPD. The AFD is actually here tied for second place. They have grown, especially in the eastern part of the state. And Berlin is very interesting because if you look at the map of it, there's different pockets of the city in pretty much each color. And this election will be as important because it will be very likely that very easy to form a coalition here. I expect the CDU will probably win and maybe form a government with the Greens and the SPD to see, a Jamaica coalition similar to what we saw in Saxony and in Brandenburg in 2019. So I don't think this is one that's going to be as heated, but all of these are still very important. But that's going to be it for this video. Of course, once we get closer, once we get more information, more polls, I will start to cover these elections. We'll probably focus on Baden-Württemberg and Rhineland-Palatinate more because they're the ones that are coming up in 5 months. But that's going to be it for this video. I wanted to kind of give a general outlook, and that's going to be it. So if you like these videos, please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you all for watching.